We overestimate what we can do in a short period of time and underestimate what we can do with consistency over time. You wake up and decide this is the week. You're going to eat better, you're going to work out, you're going to drink more water, fix your sleep, cut back on sugar, all the things. And for a few days, you're in it. You feel focused, motivated, very clear. And then something shifts. You get tired, your schedule changes, you miss one thing and then another, and before you know it, you're back where you started. And that's the frustrating part. It's not that you didn't try, it's not that you didn't know what you wanted to do. It's that something about the way you approached it just didn't hold. And this is not uncommon at all. I've experienced it, you've experienced it. In fact, studies on behavior change show that when multiple changes are introduced at the same time, the amount of progress in each area tends to be smaller. And in some cases, one change can even interfere with another. So if you've been trying to make all the changes in your life all at once, and you're frustrated because it's just not as desired, I'm here to tell you, you are not alone. Welcome to Fuller Living, your space for empowerment, inspiration, and practical health nuggets. Here you'll find relatable guidance that fits your everyday life as you journey to a fuller and healthier you. I'm your host, Dr. Ashitey. Let's dig in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fuller Living, wherever you're listening from. I am always so glad that you're here. All right, settle in, because I've got something great prepared for you. We spent the last several weeks talking through some foundational health topics. We talked about cardiometabolic health, what's happening with blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar. If you haven't already, I invite you to go listen to that series. Then we move over to GLP-1s and how our bodies regulate hunger and fullness. And last week, we talked about obesity as a medical condition, how it's influenced by biology, our environment, and our life context. So at this point, if you've been following along, you have some information. And naturally, that leads you to wanting to do everything, wanting to eat right, exercise, get 8 hours of sleep, reduce your stress all at once. But here's something I see all too often. We get excited, we set the goal, and then we crash. And we crash hard. In one of my coaching groups, I had a client who'd been following along, learning, taking everything in, and they were excited, ready to change. They walked me through their plan. They were going to change how they ate. They were going to start exercising consistently, improve their sleep routine, manage their stress, all the things. And after I listened to each of the things that they listed for me, I asked, is your plan attainable? To which they answered yes. So as a coach does, I allow my client to experience and come back. At follow up, before I could even ask, they volunteered the truth. They had taken more on than they actually thought they could. You see, the plan itself wasn't an issue. It was that everything they were trying to do all at once. There were existing routines in place before they came up with the goal, established habits, time constraints, responsibilities. And that's where I want to spend some time today. If you've been listening to these episodes, learned healthy habits, and need to be implementing them, you probably are thinking, okay, I get it. Now I need to fix everything. If that's you, this conversation is for you. If you've tried over and over again to sustain your health habits, but missed the mark time and time again, my friend, I'd like to say this conversation is for you. That urge to fix it all at once, I get it. As a matter of fact, I've been there so many times. But that instinct to fix everything all at once is where things start to break down. It feels like the right move. You finally understand what's going on. So naturally, you want to act on all of it. But when we look at this more closely, that approach tends not to work the way people expect. So let's talk about why that is. I'll give you 3 reasons why that approach is not the right approach. First, there's the issue of your attention. When someone decides to change multiple things all at once, on the surface, it's going to feel productive. It's going to feel like you're finally taking control. But what actually happens underneath is a little more complicated. Every change you're trying to make requires attention. And as I say to some of my patients and many of my coaching clients, no change that you make in your life is going to exist in a vacuum. Something else is going to have to change. Something else is going to require your attention. Think about it. You want to wake up at 5 a.m. to exercise. You usually go to bed around 11 p.m. Your usual wake up time is 7, so you get about 8 hours of sleep. For this new plan to wake up at 5 a.m., if your bedtime doesn't change, you now are only going to get 6 hours of sleep. How's that supposed to work? Now add everything else in your life to that list. You're thinking about your meals, you're thinking about your schedule, you're trying to do it all at once. You're trying to remember to drink water, manage stress, and the list goes on and on. And it doesn't work well. Research shows that when multiple behavior changes are introduced together, the progress in each area tends to be smaller. Why? Because your attention gets divided. And sometimes those changes even start to compete with each other. So instead of everything moving forward, everything starts to feel harder. Second, there's the question of sustainability. There's an assumption that if you do everything at once, you'll get results faster. But when we actually look at this in practice, that's not consistently what happens. In some studies, when people were asked to work on multiple health goals at the same time, only a small percentage were able to meet more than one. Why do you think that is? You guessed it. Sustaining multiple changes at once is so difficult. Lifestyle change isn't about starting, it's about what you can actually maintain. And third, there's how habits are actually formed. Change doesn't become meaningful until it becomes consistent. And consistency requires your attention. When you introduce one new behavior, you give it enough attention to repeat it, to build familiarity, and to start making it feel natural. But when you introduce several, none of them get enough repetition to actually stick. We see this in habit research. It takes weeks, sometimes even months, for a behavior to start feeling automatic. So if everything is new, nothing has a chance to become stable. Putting it all together, your limited attention, difficulty sustaining multiple goals, and the time it takes for habits to form, it all starts to make sense. You start strong, you get overwhelmed, things begin to fall off, and then you feel like you're back at the beginning. But what's really happening is that the way the change was structured was wrong to begin with. It wasn't something your system or your life could actually support. So, if trying to change everything all at once is where things start to break down, then a natural question is, what actually helps people succeed? I'm so glad you asked. Here are 3 things you can start doing right now to increase your chances of making your health habits stick. First, focus your efforts. One of the clearest themes in behavior research is that people do better when they work on a smaller number of clearly defined goals, not 10 goals, not 20, just a small focus. Research on goal setting shows that goals can help, but not just any goal. They tend to work best when they're specific, when they're intentional, when they're limited, you can actually attain them. And that makes sense when you think about real life. If someone says, I want to eat better, I want to work out 5 days a week, sleep 8 hours, stop snacking, drink more water, manage my stress, it sounds ambitious, but it also creates too many fronts to manage at once. Compare that with, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to focus on building one breakfast that keeps me full. Or this month, my main goal is walking after dinner 3 nights a week. That feels different, right? It gives your attention somewhere to land. I've seen this with my patients and clients so many times. When someone narrows their focus, they often feel relief immediately, not because the problem is solved, because now the path becomes more clear. Instead of waking up every day feeling like they are behind 6 different areas in their life, they now know what they're practicing, and that matters. That clear focus improves their follow through. Second, build structure around the behavior. The next thing that research shows is that good intentions are usually not good enough. And we don't need research to tell us that. We've lived it long enough to know. A person can genuinely want to change and still not follow through consistently. That's where structure comes in. There's a huge body of research around this called implementation intentions. In plain language, this means that you set a goal that says, when this happens, I do this. And this works because it reduces the number of decisions that you need to make. So instead of I need to work out more, it becomes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, after I change my clothes, I go for a 15-minute walk. Or instead of I need to eat better, it becomes when I go grocery shopping, I buy what I need for 2 lunches before I buy anything else. That's a different kind of change. It's not vague, it's attached to a cue. And because it's attached to a cue, it becomes easier to repeat. This is where your habits begin to form, not from intensity, but from repetition. If you do the same thing in the same context enough times, it's going to now require less effort. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. Habit formation can take weeks, often longer than people expect, which is another reason fixing everything at once tends to not work because nothing gets repeated long enough to become familiar. I think about my tennis example. We've talked about it before. I enjoy tennis. It's something I love to do, but I wasn't doing it consistently enough. But once I signed up for classes ahead of time, I stopped relying on that weekly decision making and the structure became around my behavior. That's what we're talking about here. Structure over desire. Structure around behavior that increases your likelihood of being consistent. Third, use a few high impact supports. Research shows that change tends to go better when people use a few active supports instead of relying on information alone. That can mean you're tracking, that can mean more feedback, that can mean accountability, or even social support. In other words, the most effective approaches are usually not passive. It's not just, I listened to the podcast and now I know what to do. It's, I listened to the podcast, chose one thing, wrote it down, checked it off my list. That is so different. Let me paint a picture. A patient decides they want to improve their eating. If all they did was hold on to that thought in their head, it stays abstract. But if they decide, I'm going to build one satisfying lunch each weekday, and they actually pay attention to whether it happened, now they have something they can learn from. Maybe they notice that lunch goes well on their work days, but falls apart during the weekend, and that's useful. They're no longer dealing with guilt, they're dealing with information. This is where coaching becomes so powerful because now the conversation shifts from, why can't I do this, to what helped me on the days I worked. That is much more productive. Bringing it all together, choose a small number of meaningful targets, build enough structure around them so they don't depend entirely on your motivation, and use a few active supports so you don't stay in the dark. Adjust and keep going. This is so different from trying to reinvent your entire life all in a week. Now, let's put it all into action. We're now at the part of the episode where we set our SMART goal. Remember, a SMART goal is one that is specific, it is measurable, attainable or achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's not vague. It's not, I'm going to do better this week or next week. It's something that is very clear, clear enough that you know exactly what you're working on. So instead of trying to fix everything, I want you to choose one area and then turn it into a SMART goal. This might sound like, for the next 7 days, I'll go for a 15-minute walk after dinner on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Notice that cue that takes away that daily decision making. Or for the next week, I will build one breakfast each day that includes a protein. Or even for the next 5 days, I'll go to bed at 10:30 p.m. Notice that all of these have something in common. They're specific, they're realistic, they're attainable, they're just one goal, not everything all at once. You're not trying to change your entire routine. You're practicing one thing consistently. And as you do this, I want you to pay attention. not just to whether you did it or not, but how that felt. What made it easier on some days? What made it harder on other days? That's where the learning happens. That's how change starts to stick. Today, we talked about something that comes up often: wanting to change and wanting to change quickly, doing everything. But what we see both in practice and research is that trying to fix everything at once often makes it harder to follow through, not because you're not capable, but because the approach itself is not designed to last. When you narrow your focus, build structure around it, and the support that you need for that process, things start to feel different, more manageable, more consistent, more sustainable. You've set a smart goal around this knowledge, and now you've set yourself up for success. If this episode helped you think about your health and wellness in a different way, share it with someone who you've been trying to figure things out with. Share it with a friend. Make sure that you're following this podcast so you don't miss the next episode. We're going to keep building on this. We're going to keep getting better, one small step at a time. And if you've been enjoying this, please take a moment to leave me your 5-star review. It helps more people find this information and start taking control of their own health. I can't wait to see you next week for another informative episode. But until then, let's get to fuller living. Well, fam, that wraps up another episode of Fuller Living, where we talk about health in a bite-sized, relatable, practical, and fun way. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress one small step at a time while remaining consistent. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, share it with a friend who might need a little bit of inspiration, and leave me your 5-star review. And if you're in Dallas and looking for a new PCP, look me up at southwestfamilymed.com. I can't wait to meet you. Until next time, let's get to fuller living.